even for example, for me moving here, part of it was to learn Polish. So like in order to get a residency with that, I need to prove that I can live here without working for a year. And you just need to show that amount of cash.
Yeah.
So for example, for us, I had to show over 150,000 zloty sitting in my bank account. Yeah. To be fair, we live in an expensive apartment and you have to show you can pay for the apartment for a year. But so that was a huge contributor to the formula. But there's a formula. You have to pay for your Polish classes for the whole year.
Yeah.
You have to show that you have the money to buy the ticket to go back wherever you're going to leave. You have to show you have you get your rent. You literally have the exact amount for your rent for a whole year. For a lot of people, that's not easy to do. But then even in the application, it took a very long time for it to get approved. And even I encountered different scenarios where I sent my application, they reviewed it, and they just said that the money that I showed is a lie. Like it's just, they don't believe I have that money. And even though I showed the bank statement, and it's a legal bank statement. And, so
where do you think that bias was coming from then?
Here's the thing I've also encountered in Poland, which is very interesting, is like a lot of times, because I lived in the US for 10 years. So a lot of times, a lot of bad things happen to me just because people assumed something about me because of the color of my skin. In Poland, a lot of times, if something weird happens to me, because I lived in the US so long, I would assume that. But then many times I realize like it's happening to everybody. So for example, Alexis has had her own she's an American, she looks white, but she's also dealt with the immigration system here where they literally told her she doesn't earn enough money to live here. And she's like, no, look at the amount and my proof of my statements and my taxes and everything. And they're like, oh, yes. But it was the first thing she put there anyway, right? So sometimes I think maybe, the immigration office would probably right now it's overworked. They're understaffed and maybe it takes a very fast, they scan through these applications. So it's very hard for me to say, oh, it was because I'm from Nigeria. Secondly, I have a second passport from the Caribbean, which was how I applied. So people from the Caribbean are also Black. So I don't know if that impacted anything at all. But my lawyer came back and said he claimed it was a racial problem. And he wrote a very stinking letter to immigration being like, if this is a fake document, I was supposed to be prosecuted. And the lawyer, should be prosecuted also. So where's the prosecution?
Why was that?
In order to prove that I have the funds, the law is I need to send that amount of money into a Polish bank account. So it could be any bank in Poland, but I need to open a Polish bank account. I literally went to 10 to 11 banks and none of them would open a bank account for me. This is how the process would go. I would go into the bank and I would fill out the form, and it's usually a very long form because it's about you, where you're from, why you need an account, what your status is in Poland,
source of income,
what's your source of income, all of that. And so you do all of that, and then you give it to the banker, and then they send it to the back room for risk assessment and processing and a bunch of stuff. And every time we would do this, they would come back and be like, oh, sorry, we cannot open an account. And then we're like, why? What's the reason? They're like, oh, I don't know. They just told us from the bank. They don't give us a reason. So we went from bank 1 to bank 2 to bank 3. Think of any bank you've ever seen in Poland. I've probably been in that bank.
Including the international ones.
Including the international ones. So from Bank Pekao to Santander to ING, just name the bank. So after a while, this, I can understand from the first time, first, second, third time. And this took several days because we would go to 3 banks in a day and then try another day. And it's very funny because the very first time when I was visiting Poland and we were talking about living here, I told Alexis, hey, asked her, how easy is it to open a bank account in Poland? She's like, very easy. I don't it took me 10 minutes. And I was like,
American privilege.
Yeah. I don't think she understood that at the time. And,
I didn't know the financial world was so highly regulated enough.
So I was like, yeah, I still want to. She's like, no. If we decide to stay, try then. Again, I'm like, all right, as in they take American debit credit cards here. So I didn't have any problem. Apple Pay works. So we kept trying 2-3 banks a day. It kept failing and nobody could give us a reason. At this point, I'm getting frustrated, at the bank, I even go to the bank and I'm telling them hey, I'm Nigerian. I'm also from St. Kitts. Can you open a bank account for me? And every time they're like, yeah. This is very straightforward. Towards halfway through, people started being the bankers were like, well, if you have a residence card, we can open the bank account for you.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yes, but I need the bank account to get the residence card. And, and they're like, oh, really? And, so it felt like a disconnect between the Polish immigration system with the Polish banking system. If the Polish immigration system was going to ask you to get a bank account, but then the banks don't approve accounts for people that are trying to move to Poland.
So the immigration system was saying, in order to send this application for this purpose, you need a bank account. The bank were saying you can open a bank account if you have a residence card.
Yes.
And so it was
was
like,
a-
it was a vicious cycle.
There's a catch-22. We kept trying. At some point, I literally was talking to the guy, the banker, and I was like, please, I just need to understand. Like, I am confused. Like, what is going on? And he was like, okay, I have a St. Kitts passport, and that's fine. They can open a bank account for that. A Nigerian passport, they need a residence card to open for because of whatever financial list Nigeria, the country, is on. I'm like, okay, great. But then why don't you just open for my other passport? They're like, well, we use your worst passport to evaluate you. So even if I showed up with a US passport, they would be like, yeah, but you're also still Nigerian. So, whatever financial restrictions. And, that was interesting to me because it's like, nobody can help where they're born, but then because you were born in a country and it's regulated in the world or in Europe or under a certain category, a gray list or whatever, you're in this catch-22 position. So I went to my lawyer and said, look, they're not going to open a bank account for me in Poland, just, literally because I'm Nigerian. And for Nigerians, you need to be a resident first for most banks. And so there's a law that you can, if it's a lawyer, they can hold your money because he's an officer of the law. So if he can stand in place of me, basically, according to how he explained to me. So if we sent the money to him, he could take a screenshot of his bank account and that would serve as evidence because the transfer came from a bank account that has my name on it. So that would serve as evidence that I do have those funds. Basically, he'll be the custodian of those funds for me. We signed a bunch of power of attorney and a bunch of things to give him the power to represent me. And this was how we applied, basically saying, I do have these funds and this is the proof of the funds. And so this is why my lawyer got upset when the immigration office said that this doesn't it's falsified, because the lawyer is like, first of all, you're accusing me, your lawyer, of committing a crime. And under Polish law, if you believe this to be true, you are actually, as an immigration officer, obligated to report him, the lawyer, to, the police. But he's like, I checked with the police and you don't have a case against me. So you either follow up on your claims or give my client his residence.
That was in his appeal.
Yeah.
That was in the written appeal.
That was a written appeal. He literally wrote 5 pages. So for him, I think he took it more as a racial thing. I don't know. But as in, if I want to be factual, I don't know.
Like you said previously, I think they're overworked, understaffed.
Yeah.
Right. And it could just be an easy reject reason that you're coming from Nigeria, as an example, in a case where you might have some financial sanctions, etc. And therefore, without really going into the detail of your particular case, just based on, it's an easy reject.
Exactly. Yeah. And, and this is, for me, this is a particularly interesting thing too, because as somebody that's moving to a country, I'm just trying to do it the correct way, the right way. But even the correct way is blocked a lot of times. There's a lot of complications. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And that brings to my question, what is Poland's overarching migration policy? But, that's way beyond my pay grade. There are people literally employed to answer that question.